Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's me, Crazyfrankie, and I'd like to welcome you to my Week 13 4 key game picks. Before we talk about Week number 13, what happened during Thanksgiving week last week of Week number 12? Well, a couple of things was a little bit surprising. Probably the little bit of the surprising part, which probably we should have not have been a surprise, actually was the Detroit Lions losing to the Packers, which is very rare of me to say something like that, given the history of the Packers basically have dominated the Lions even during their lean years. The Packers have owned the Lions for a long time, and especially now, it's been a while since the Packers have beat the Lions on Thanksgiving. I kind of think that the Lions really did get worn out from that comeback victory over the Bears. I think it really did affect them. And obviously, it really affected Jared Goff. He had definitely his worst game of the season with so many turnovers in that game. And they basically had to play catch up the rest of the way in that Thanksgiving game. That one was really kind of a surprise to see the Lions play like that, given the fact that they've been pretty consistent during the year. But obviously, there is some issues going on defensive-wise. The Packers and Jordan Love actually did a fantastic job of exposing the secondary. And obviously for the Lions and their offensive line, there's a little bit of some issues I could see right now. They have got to protect Jared Goff at all costs. They really have not been able to. They weren't able to in the last few weeks. And if you're a Lions fan, that is a bit concerning right now, especially given the fact that the division lead, even though it's still a little bit of a cushion, you better hope that the Packers don't start getting on a groove themselves and start crawling their way back into contention. Obviously they're in for playoff contention at the moment, but they could still be in it for the division as well, which was something we didn't look like it was possible about way back in maybe early September or anything like that. So it's really tough to say if you're a Lions fan right now. It is kind of it's a little bit of some nerves right now, especially having a little bit of some extra rest and now getting ready against the Saints. It is going to be one of the key games I will talk about in just a few minutes. When I look at what else happened in week number 12, the Cowboys were dominant, but of course they were playing a Washington team that's basically going nowhere. The 49ers really dominated the Seahawks also on Thanksgiving, and and obviously that big game coming up this week against the Eagles is another game I will talk about. So yeah, and how about really the way we're looking at this might have been the game of the year. And speaking of the Eagles and Bills, a game that totally went back and forth in the second half. Definitely this game really was a classic. I will say that. But who's to say that this game coming up against the 49ers may be another instant classic? Who's to say right now? Because this is a rematch of the NFC Championship without Brock Purdy. If you remember what happened in last year's NFC title game, Brock Purdy was injured. Now this time, Brock Purdy will be healthy, and let's see what the 49ers and the Eagles do, and what could be another instant classic here. Tough to say what will happen in this football game. But when I look at what else happened in the rest of the week, obviously the Chiefs also had to come from behind to beat the Raiders when it looked like the Raiders might have pulled a big upset of all sorts. So really, when I look at it right now, if you look at the AFC right now, until somebody knocks off the Chiefs, to me the Chiefs are still the favorites, even though Baltimore destroyed the Chargers and looked like the Ravens now still look like they could be the team to beat in the conference. But I want to see them against KC. That's what I want to see if Baltimore is ready to take that next step. And as far as what happens in the NFC right now, it's really going to be either the 49ers or the Eagles at the moment right now as the best team in the conference. Anyways, everybody, let's now talk about week number 13. This week is going to be a little bit interesting because a lot of football teams are on their bye week, so there's not going to be the way I look at the schedule, and the way I look at which games I could be worth talking about. Well, you be the judge of it in the comments. Anyways, let's begin with key game number 1, and that is the Thursday night game between the Seahawks and the Cowboys. The Cowboys are a huge 8.5 favorite, and the reason why I say this is a key game, it's really for the Seahawks to stay in contention for a playoff spot, because the way it's looking right now, they're probably only going to be fighting for a playoff spot. I think the NFC West now is pretty much starting to look out of contention for them. So basically now this is to keep their playoff hopes alive for the Seahawks. But for the Cowboys, they're trying to keep pace for that number 1 seed, and obviously they're trying to catch the Eagles for the NFC East division. Geno Smith, 18 of 27, 180 yards, 1 interception. He had no touchdowns in that game, obviously because the 49ers defense really got to him last week. Dak Prescott against the Commanders last week, they really destroyed them. We went 22 of 32, 331 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Boy, when I look at this football game, obviously this is a game more that the Seahawks really have to have just to keep in contention. But the way they played against the 49ers last week, especially given the fact that their defense really got to Geno Smith, obviously there were some miscues. There was one miscue in that game where Brock Purdy did throw a pick 6, but the 49ers were able to rebound in that game. And the way I look at the Seahawks right now, they're going to have to really pull out all the stops, whatever rabbit they got to put out of the magician's hat. They have got to find a way to break through that Cowboy defense. It is really a tough game for the Seahawks here. It's kind of going to be an easy pick for me. You can't go wrong with it. 8.5 is about right on this one here. You got to go with the Cowboys in this one here. For the Seahawks, this is kind of the way they're given their remaining schedule. They got some brutal games coming up, but because they got the 49ers one more time, and at the same time too, it's really, they're fighting for their playoff lives right now. But for this game, the Cowboys are going to be too much for the Seahawks to handle, especially given the fact that the Seahawks really need this game just to stay in contention. I don't think there's any way they're going to beat the Cowboys in this one here. You got to go with the Cowboys here at -8.5. Cowboys over the Seahawks. Key game number 2. The Bengals versus the Jaguars. The Jaguars are 7.5-point favorite, and that was probably about right. Given how the Bengals played and Browning was 19 of 26, 227 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He was lucky to get a touchdown in that game, obviously, but the Steelers really found a way to hold the Bengals to basically a touchdown in that game, and it's just the Bengals didn't have enough. Obviously, they're missing Joe Burrow really hard right now on this football team. Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars, they basically were really in a fight with the Texans, and luckily they pulled away with a victory last week. Trevor Lawrence was 23 of 38, 364 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. There's no question for the Jaguars, this definitely will be kind of well, anybody could be beat in the NFL. Let's be real. I mean, you never know when you get when any NFL team that supposedly should win this game easily is really not. I don't think this will be a trap game for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their defense did a fantastic job holding C.J. Stroud big time in that game against the Texans, and the Bengals without Burrow and without some other key players they have that are injured, it's just going to be, you're asking too much of this Bengals team to even have a chance to beat the Jaguars. The way it's looking right now, the Bengals playoff hopes now might officially end this Sunday against the Jaguars. You got to go with the Jaguars in this one here at -7.5. It should be more of an obvious pick here because Cincinnati's really depleted. Given the fact that obviously with Joe Burrow's injury, it really took a lot out of the football team, and it's really going to be tough. Given the Bengals, they got a brutal schedule the rest of the way. It is not in their favor. There's no way that Browning might save this football team. So, yeah, the Jacksonville Jaguars should beat the Bengals here. Probably by 10, maybe by 13 points. I don't think it'll be much of a game in this one here. Jaguars over the Bengals. Key game number 3. The Detroit Lions versus the New Orleans Saints. A game that the only reason why I also consider this as a key game right now, because the Saints and the Falcons basically are at the top. Given their bad record right now, they're at the top of the NFC South division. They're tied. And this is really of a must-win game, really more for the Saints as it is for the Lions, because the Saints are trying to keep their playoff hopes alive, because probably the only way they're going to get in the playoffs is to win the NFC South. Now, the Lions are a 4-point favorite in this one here. I would say that's about right, but it wouldn't surprise me if this goes to 3.5, maybe 3. Tough to say on this one here. Jared Goff, in one of his worst games so far this season, was 29 of 44, 332 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had a couple of turnovers, but they were fumbles. He didn't have any interceptions, but he did fumble. He had a couple of balls that came loose, so he had 2 fumbles in the game and really was penalized a lot for intentional grounding. Derek Carr for the Saints was 24 of 38, 304 yards, one interception. He had no touchdowns in that game at all. I look at for this game here, this should be kind of a bounce-back game for the Detroit Lions. But given how their defense really struggled against the Packers last week, I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Saints were to give the Lions defense a harder time in this one here. Because given that Taysom Hill can pretty much play in multiple positions and the way they could do some trickery here, it wouldn't surprise me if they catch the Lions defense off guard. The Lions offensive line really has to find a way to protect Jared Goff if he really has any time to throw any decent pass, because he really struggled a lot against the Packers last week on Thanksgiving, and it's going to be really interesting to see if Dan Campbell can get that football team back on track, get this team ready for this game, because you could say that this should be a bounce back game for the Lions, but I cannot say that because there might be some issues going on with the Lions defense that they haven't addressed yet that needs to be fixed, or it's going to be a problem the rest of the season. I'm still going to pick the Detroit Lions in this one here because I think they'll bounce back here, but it's definitely going to be a football game, and it wouldn't surprise me if this game goes back and forth, given the way they had to go back and forth with the Bears a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to pick the Detroit Lions. I think they'll definitely bounce back here. They'll beat the Saints, but it'll be a much closer margin than you would expect. So I'm going to pick the Lions at -4 in this one here, the Lions over the New Orleans Saints. And finally, key game number 4, you know which game I'm talking about here, the big one this weekend, the 49ers versus the Eagles. The 49ers are actually, the odds makers have the 49ers as a 2-point favorite, and that number is sure to go to 1.5, maybe -1 by kickoff. The Lions are definitely going to move in this game big time. Brock Purdy was 21 of 30, 209 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 interception in a big victory over the Seattle Seahawks. Jalen Hurts was 18 of 31, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and basically he scored the game-winning touchdown last week against the Bills. This is going to come to mind question marks for the Philadelphia Eagles here. Can Jalen Hurts and that offensive line, if they have to do the Philly shove or the tush push, whatever you want to call it, against this 49er defense, which to me, the 49ers defense is definitely in the top 5 and possibly one of the best defenses this year. This is where the question marks. Can the Phillies, the brotherly shove or the tush push, whatever you want to call it, has been really effective for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now the real test is going to be if they have to use that play against the 49ers in this game. Let's see if they are actually successful, because if they are against that 49er defense, boy, that play is just going to haunt and scare defenses all year long. A lot of it's going to determine who makes the big plays in this game. Can McCaffrey and that running game get going for the 49ers against this Philly defense? Can Jalen Hurts find a way to break through that 49er defense as well? It's going to come down to who does not turn the ball over. That's going to be key in this football game, because this game for sure is definitely going to go back and forth. I can see this game going back and forth. It won't be a blowout like it was in the NFC title game. Everybody on both teams more or less is healthy, but there will be some game time decisions for both these two teams. Hard to say at the moment right now, but it's a tough pick here on who wins this football game. But I got to make a pick here, which could be the game of the year. Tough to say. I don't know. Because the Bills-Eagles game, to me, that was already a candidate for the game of the year. Who knows if this one will be an instant classic. I'm going to pick the 49ers here. I think the defense will finally be able to get to the Eagles. I think the real test will definitely be, can they stop that brotherly shove, the tush push, whatever you want to call it. But I think, to me, if the 49ers get the running game going and get McCaffrey going, I think, to me, and George Kittle going, I think, to me, the 49ers are definitely going to be on a winning track here. It's going to be a very close game, no question. But I'm going to pick the 49ers here. I think the 49ers will barely escape Philadelphia with a victory, and more than likely could end up being the number 1 seed. the way things are going. I'm going to pick the 49ers here. It's a tough pick. This is a 50-50 pick. It's hard to pick in this one here who's going to win this game. I'm going to go with the 49ers here. I think the 49ers will finally get some sort of revenge. I'm going to pick the 49ers over the Eagles. All right, everybody, that wraps up my 4 key game picks for week number 13. Please check the description below for all of my week 13 picks, and I'll talk to you guys next week when I make my picks for week 14. Take care and enjoy your NFL weekend.